There is a clay tablet sitting in a university drawer in Philadelphia that was excavated from Nippur between 1889 and 1900. The catalog calls it a Sumerian creation hymn. But the final column, water-stained, barely legible along its lower edge, contains a sequence of events that follows the book of Genesis almost line by line. Creation of humans, a walled enclosure, a prohibition, a violation, a change in status, a removal. The tablet predates Genesis by 2,000 years. The question is not whether the parallel exists. The question is what it means. The drawer itself is where this begins, not with grand claims about ancient civilization or borrowed mythology. It begins with a small piece of clay cracked through the upper left corner, its third column only partially legible, its final column, water-stained but intact along the bottom edge, where the last signs were pressed into the surface with noticeably more force than the surrounding text. The piece was cataloged in the early 20th century. Museum summaries call it a hymn. But inside the same archival drawer, researchers have found an older index card, written not in a scholar's hand, but in the careful notation of an archivist. And beside the genre classification, someone placed a question mark. That question mark is small. Archivists make informal notes. A punctuation mark in a catalog is not evidence of anything, and the official reading of the tablet has been maintained for decades. The parallel to Genesis has been acknowledged by mainstream scholarship as a case of shared cultural memory. Two traditions, both rooted in the ancient Near East, drawing from the same reservoir of oral mythology. The Sumerian version is poetic and symbolic. The Hebrew version is theological. The overlap, scholars argue, is expected, but the structural precision of this overlap is not expected. Creation myths vary enormously across ancient Mesopotamia. Different cities, different periods, different divine hierarchies produce radically different accounts of how the world began and how humans arrived in it. Yet, this tablet follows the Genesis sequence with an exactness that thematic overlap does not usually produce. The same order, the same stages, formation of humans, placement in an enclosed space, a rule delivered by the figure in authority, a transgression of that rule, a consequence, a removal from the enclosed space. The sequence does not vary, not even in the parts where the clay was damaged. Column 3 has a gap of approximately 4 lines. Whatever happened during the transgression, the moment of violation, is missing from the readable surface. The official record acknowledges the damage and moves past it. The gap is treated as one of many unfortunate losses in the cuneiform corpus. Ancient clay breaks, signs wear away. The missing lines are simply gone. That is the official explanation, and it would be the complete explanation if not for one word that appears in column 1, line 7, pressed into the clay in a sign slightly smaller than those around it, as if added by a different hand or at a different moment. The word is not the standard Sumerian term for a divine being. The sign for Dingir, the most common Sumerian determinative for a god or deity, is not what appears in that line. Instead, there is a compound sign, a construction that translates in a disputed but not invented reading as something closer to one who oversees the enclosure. Not a creator, not a deity in the theological sense. An overseer. This compound sign does not appear in Sumerian religious hymns. It does not appear in mythological texts describing gods and their domains. It appears in administrative documents, land records, agricultural management texts, and in one case, in a prison register used to describe the official responsible for maintaining the boundary of a detention facility. The same sign, the same functional description, in an entirely different archival context. The mainstream translation does not ignore this. Sumerian divine titles are genuinely complex, and the language of administration and the language of theology were deeply entangled in Mesopotamian culture. The gods, as understood by the Sumerians, were managers of reality. They assigned roles, maintained records, and administered the cosmos the way a temple institution administered a city. Overseer language in a description of a divine figure is not automatically strange. The translation into Lord or God is defensible. But that word appears again in the final column, beside the word for expulsion. In 1902, a German Assyriologist working in a European university produced a handwritten draft translation of this tablet. That draft was never published. The published version of the tablet came from a British team in 1911, and the word in question was rendered as Lord throughout. The German draft, by contrast, used the word Aufseher, supervisor, overseer. The 1902 translator also wrote in the margin in German that the term resists purely theological classification. That margin note has never appeared in any published discussion of the tablet. The draft itself was referenced in a footnote in a 1967 comparative study of Nippur texts and then not mentioned again. The German draft exists. It is archived. What makes it significant is not the alternative word choice. Translators disagree constantly, and the 1911 team had access to a larger comparative corpus. What makes it significant is column 3. In the 1902 draft, 4 additional lines are translated in the section officially described as too damaged to read. The German translator worked from the tablet before the British team cleaned it. Standard conservation practice involved light abrasion to clarify sign boundaries. Cleaning is not suppression, but cleaning may also remove faint impressions that a careful earlier eye could still detect. According to the 1902 draft, those 4 lines do not describe a sin. They do not describe a spiritual transgression or a moment of divine disobedience. They describe an action. The humans inside the enclosure accessed something they were told not to access. And the result was that the overseer figure made a record of what occurred. Stop for a moment and think about what that means. In Sumerian mythology, gods respond to transgression with anger, with punishment, with cosmic consequence. What gods do not do, what the mythological register does not produce, is make a record. Record making is administrative language. It appears in legal texts, in inventory documents, in accounts of labor disputes, and judicial proceedings. A god who responds to transgression by documenting it is not behaving like a god in any known Sumerian theological framework. An administrator who responds to a violation of rules by documenting it is behaving exactly like an administrator. The German draft may have been speculative. Early translators sometimes filled damaged sections with interpretive reconstruction rather than strict reading of visible signs. The 4 lines cannot be verified against the current state of the clay. This is not a confirmed translation. It is a contested one. The official record does not endorse it, but the word for enclosure used in that damaged section connects to a second physical object found at the same site in the same stratigraphic layer. The cylinder seal is 3.8 centimeters tall. Black serpentine. It is currently held in a museum collection, cataloged as a standard mythological scene. The image it carries, pressed into clay and rolled out to leave its impression on documents, shows a walled enclosure with 2 human figures inside, a tree at the center, and a third figure positioned outside the wall. The figure outside the wall is described in the official catalog as a god observing the garden. The detail the catalog does not mention is what the figure outside the wall appears to be holding. The object is small, the impression worn, but the shape is consistent with what Sumerian imagery uses to represent a writing instrument. Cylinder seals were not decorative objects. They were administrative tools used to authenticate documents, seal storage jars, and mark property. They were the equivalent of an official signature in clay. A scene carved on a cylinder seal was not chosen arbitrarily. It represented something meaningful about the transaction or institution the seal was used to authenticate. A scene showing a walled enclosure, 2 humans inside, a tree, and an external figure with a writing instrument pressed into the same administrative tool that was found in the same stratigraphic layer as the tablet is not incidental. The catalog describes the scene as mythological. Cylinder seals frequently combine mythological and administrative imagery, and the figure may simply represent a scribe god, a common enough figure in Sumerian iconography. This is the safe reading, and it is not unreasonable. But the cuneiform sign pressed into the surface of the seal, a single mark authenticating the object itself, is the same compound sign from column 1 of the tablet, the same word, the same construction, one who oversees the enclosure. Here is where the story requires you to step back and look at everything at once. The tablet follows Genesis in exact sequence. The divine figure in the tablet is described not with the standard word for God, but with a functional term used in administrative contexts. The word for the enclosed space is the same word used in Sumerian land management records to describe a walled agricultural zone. The scene on the cylinder seal from the same site shows the same configuration: enclosure, humans inside, external observer with a writing instrument. And the word on the seal matches the word on the tablet. One controversial reading, not the mainstream reading, not the safe reading, treats none of this as mythology. It treats the text as institutional memory, an account of how humans were placed in a bounded space and managed by entities whose titles described function rather than divinity. This reading requires accepting contested translations, speculative reconstruction, and connections between sources that the official record treats as separate. It is a significant methodological risk. The professional consensus reads the tablet as a creation hymn, and the consensus exists for good reasons. But the final column still has not been reached, and it is the final column that changes the weight of everything above it. The Sumerian tradition did not record the enclosure story only once. A separate text, the Atrahasis epic, widely accepted as one of the oldest flood narratives in human history, opens not with an account of divine creation, but with a description of exhaustion. The Igigi, a class of lower divine beings, are described in the first tablet as tired. They have been performing labor that is too great for them. The solution is the creation of humans, built to carry the burden, designed to replace the effort that the Igigi can no longer sustain. The Akkadian word used for the burden that humans are created to carry uses the same administrative root found in Sumerian labor management texts. The gods in Atrahasis do not create humans out of love or cosmic purpose. They create humans because they needed workers, and the workers they had were collapsing under the load. The mainstream reading of Atrahasis accepts this completely. It is understood as a labor creation myth, an ancient way of explaining why humans work, why existence feels like effort, why the world imposes its weight on those who live in it. This is not a fringe interpretation. It is the scholarly consensus. But if the Sumerian texts are describing the creation of humans for institutional labor purposes, and if the word for the figure overseeing the enclosure is consistently an administrative term rather than a theological one, then the Genesis parallel becomes something different from shared mythology. It becomes two records of the same institutional origin story told in different languages separated by 2,000 years, but following the same sequence because both are describing the same chain of events. The Atrahasis epic also contains a flood, and the flood in Atrahasis does not begin with divine anger. It begins with population management. Before the flood, the text records two prior attempts to reduce the human population. Plague, then drought. The reason given for each intervention is that the number and noise of humans had grown too great and was disturbing the senior divine figures. The specific Akkadian word used to describe the disturbance humans caused appears in one other context in the known corpus, an administrative complaint text describing laborers making excessive noise near a temple storage complex. Three sequential attempts to reduce a population, plague, drought, flood, each escalating in scale, is not the narrative structure of divine wrath. It is the structure of a policy problem that keeps failing until it goes too far. The mainstream explanation reads this as mythological logic, sequential failures leading to catastrophic resolution, a common enough narrative pattern in ancient storytelling. This is a reasonable reading. Ancient texts often use cosmic events and divine interventions to explain the shape of human experience in symbolic terms. But the text does not stop with the flood. After the flood, the Atrahasis record describes a new system being introduced. Humans will now die naturally. Certain women will not be able to have children. A specific class of women will live in temple service and not reproduce at all. The text presents these not as curses, but as solutions, corrections to a population problem that had produced the chaos leading to the flood. The word used in a damaged section of the Akkadian tablet, partially reconstructed, and the reconstruction is contested. For the installation of natural death into the human condition uses the same administrative route found in Sumerian texts for installing an official in a position of responsibility. An etiological myth explains why the world is the way it is. This text describes the world being adjusted. That implies a prior state, a decision, and an implementation. The speculative leap here is significant, and it should be acknowledged plainly. Ambiguous language in a damaged and partially reconstructed text cannot confirm that human biology was deliberately engineered by entities capable of making that decision. The safe reading is that this is mythological narrative about mortality and fertility, not a biological record. The safe reading is available. None of the documents discussed so far. The German draft, the cylinder seal, the Atrahasis epic, the administrative language, the structural parallel to Genesis. None of it is as disturbing as what appears in the final column of the original tablet. A 1974 comparative study of Nippur texts described the final column as containing a liturgical closing formula. Standard temple hymn conclusion. The same study noted in a single footnote on the second to last page that the final three signs of the column do not match any known closing formula in the Nippur corpus. The footnote does not elaborate. No follow-up study has addressed the discrepancy. The three signs are visible in existing scans. They are pressed deeper into the clay than the surrounding text, with more force, or with a fresher stylus, or possibly added at a different time by a different hand. No other tablet in the Nippur collection ends with these three signs together. They appear together in one other known context: a boundary marking inscription found at a different site in southern Iraq, carved beside a doorway. The doorway was sealed with fired brick. Excavators opened it and found an empty chamber. No burial goods, no artifacts, no inscriptions on the floor, only the walls, which contain faint carved lines that a 1996 excavation report described in a single sentence as requiring further study. No further study has been published. Empty sealed chambers are not impossible to explain. Rooms were sometimes prepared for burials that never occurred. Storage spaces were sometimes cleared in antiquity. The official record does not treat this chamber as unusual, and the official record may be right. But the boundary inscription at that sealed doorway uses those same three signs, plus a fourth. In one fringe reading, proposed by a researcher whose work appeared in a single publication and was not subsequently cited in the mainstream literature, the four signs together constitute a threshold warning. The enclosure has been closed. What was inside has been moved. Why would a tablet that parallels Genesis end with the same notation found beside a sealed empty chamber at a different site? The connection requires accepting a fringe translation, an unpublished set of carved lines, and a link between two separate archaeological contexts as meaningful. Any one of those steps could be wrong. All three could be wrong independently. The official explanation may still be correct, and the three signs may be a scribal variation no one has identified yet, or an ending formula attested in sources not yet recovered. But the answer to the first question, why does this tablet follow Genesis word for word, may not be that the Hebrews borrowed from the Sumerians, or that the Sumerians and Hebrews drew from the same mythological well. The disturbing possibility, the one that neither the mainstream reading nor the fringe reading has fully addressed, is that both texts inherited the same administrative record, that what Genesis calls the garden and what the Sumerian text calls a kiri, a walled agricultural enclosure managed by an institutional overseer, were the same thing, and that both texts, separated by 2,000 years of transmission, were remembering something rather than inventing something. The final line of the tablet is below the three pressed signs, partially damaged. The lower half of the signs worn smooth, as if that edge of the clay was handled more than the rest, as if someone returned to that line more than once. The German translator in 1902 read it as Amagai, a Sumerian word with two recognized meanings. In its literal form, return to the mother. In its legal and administrative use, freedom, or release from obligation. In the context of a tablet about humans placed in an enclosure by an overseer figure, the final word beneath the boundary notation may mean only one thing: released. The tablet is still in storage. The drawer still closes. The worn edge of the clay is still waiting for a better scan, for someone to look at the final line with fresh equipment and fresh eyes and settle the question of what the German translator thought he could read in 1902. Three explanations remain: coincidence, shared mythology, linguistic ambiguity, the human mind finding patterns in damaged clay. Mistranslation. The German draft was speculative. The signs are contested. The parallel is thematic and not structural. Or the disturbing possibility that the oldest text to follow Genesis word for word ends not with a hymn, but with a notation. If you want to follow what comes next, subscribe and continue with the next video, because the sealed door is only the beginning.